This is Elected, a podcast for women in and around politics and our active accomplices. I'm your host, Sarah Elder Chaminara, and today my guest is Lisa Lachance, MLA for Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island, and Deputy Speaker of the Nova Scotia NDP. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good.
So before we get started, in the spirit of reconciliation, it's important to me to share my personal commitment to learning the history of colonialism and the ongoing systemic violence and oppression against Indigenous peoples. The land where I live, work, and record from is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, the Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. Hi, Lisa. Welcome to Elected. It's so nice to have you.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
And you're the first person I've talked with actually from Nova Scotia on the podcast. So
great.
Yes. So for people who aren't familiar with your riding of Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island, can you give me kind of like if I'm, standing in downtown Halifax, where is your riding located?
If you're standing in downtown Halifax, you're standing in my riding.
Well then.
So that's pretty easy. So it's an incredibly diverse riding. Basically it's, in Halifax terms is what we would call the South End. If you looked at a map of Halifax, so Halifax Regional Municipality is huge. I think it's one of the largest municipalities in Canada in terms of size, like geographic size. But the core, like the old city of Halifax, is much smaller than that, of course. And then the sort of downtown is on a peninsula. So if you're looking at that little peninsula, if you zoomed in on a map and found the peninsula of Halifax, I'd be the half that's pointing the most out into the harbor. So there's ocean on three sides. It starts in like a residential kind of university neighborhood. And then the line goes all the way downtown, includes our iconic Citadel Hill, then goes right out to Point Pleasant Park, which is our park on the ocean. There's a lot of diversity in terms of socioeconomic status. So there's some, waterfront, amazing homes. And there's also, a lot of poverty in the riding. There's a lot of students. So I have 5 post-secondary institutions headquartered in the riding, and then we have a couple of others who have like satellite offices and that sort of thing. So lots of students and lots of faculty and staff who also rely on the work, and we're also this amazingly growing downtown. So a historic base. I think that's a lot of people think about Halifax and its beautiful waterfront and its historic piers, and that's all true. But if you look at the skyline right now, like coming onto the peninsula recently, I quickly counted 11 cranes that I could see, which for Halifax is like a lot of development. So lots of new people coming into the riding, and yeah, very diverse.
That's I've had the opportunity to visit Halifax a few times, and it's very beautiful. Obviously, downtown is amazing, as well as the Citadel. And it's exciting to hear that more people might be calling Halifax home if you have that kind of development going on, because it's so beautiful and so unique.
Yeah, I think the challenge is that none of that development would be considered affordable. So while I would say that there's a lot of diversity in terms of socioeconomic background, and but on that front in particular, like I think we're kind of quickly losing our affordable housing in the riding, and it's certainly a huge concern for lots and lots of people, kind of at all different types of housing, including those who need more affordable housing, but even kind of there's, you can go on the doorstep or get a phone call from someone who works for the Nova Scotia government, and it's like, I'm one rent increase from moving out of here. Like, I can't afford to pay the rent in downtown Halifax. So yes, the development is exciting. It's new. We like, this is a rare thing to sort of see in Halifax, but definitely calls into question a lot about, sort of who we are and what kind of communities we want to have.
And so, how does your background prior to politics inform the lens that you have now on issues related to affordability and your work in the legislature, not only as an MLA, but as the deputy speaker?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a good question, and I'll try not to ramble on too much. I think on a personal level, when I was, I grew up in, not, we weren't wealthy. We were at best the working poor, but often slid into more desperate circumstances depending on what was sort of going on in the world and in our families. And but I really also grew up with a really strong commitment to social justice, and to advancing equality and equity. So I think that, really, and I spent years in sort of student politics in the riding, actually, because I went to Dalhousie University. So spent years in the feminist movement in the riding, and have worked with a lot of different nonprofits as a volunteer. So transition housing, for a long time. I was, like, for 30 years. This is, because I've been around the riding for a while. I've been involved with Stepping Stone, which is a rights-based organization for sex workers in Halifax. So all that to say, sort of bringing that together. And then I've worked in government. So I worked federally, I worked provincially, I worked at the Provincial Department of Finance. I also worked at the university and had my own business. So all of that, comes together in terms of, I think my concern and my understanding of the challenges of affordability, the cost of living crisis, like I can feel that, quite viscerally. I also do understand, like, that there are, there's the need for government to take action short term, medium term, and long term. I think I have a good appreciation of the complexity of those levels of action, but just the real need to, and then also, I guess, just a real trust in community as well.
Well, and you were first elected, I think, in 2021, so fairly recently, and during the pandemic. So how did you make the leap from being in the private and public sectors and being in business for yourself to running and, bringing this lens to government in Nova Scotia?
Well, I think it was something that was on my radar for a while. I haven't, I've been an NDP supporter my whole life, but have not actually been, super engaged. So I canvassed for different candidates, and we lived in Ottawa for a period of time. Canvassed there, canvassed in Halifax. But I think, over, like, sort of about the past decade or so, have really also, loving living in Halifax and being in Nova Scotia, we've really struggled to access the right services for our children in particular. So mental health services, educational supports, inclusive education. And, we had a lot of agency in advocating for those changes. And my partner and I had, a lot of privilege in terms of, our education, our jobs, people that we know. And I guess we really felt like if we couldn't make the system respond to the absolute sort of, I'm going to say, desperate needs of our family, then, we're, clearly these systems are not working and we're losing people on the way. So that really motivated me to run. So this seemed like a good time. I was really excited about the current NDP team and the work they were doing. So wanted to be part of that. And yeah, I guess just just went for it. But yeah, that's like it's an interesting question in terms of like how you actually decide like, okay, all right, I'm gonna do this.
Well, I think so many people's circumstances can be unique. But obviously, I think a lot of the time it draws on like unique lived experiences of the person. And a lot of it has to do with the timing.
Hmm.
Where did you run in a contested nomination or because I
I
can
did.
imagine that you're in a pretty, um, you're in a highly desirable riding.
Well, it's a riding too that has along, all of Halifax, and really I would say most of Nova Scotia, but definitely Halifax has a long NDP history and tradition. So this was a riding which at the time was being held by the Liberals, but had been NDP before that and many times before that. But was definitely a very flexible riding as well. Like kind of has been all three parties that we have here. And yeah, so it was a contested nomination. So that I think I I I won't put words into the other person's mouth, but we spoke up front. I think we really wanted to make this a very productive nomination process in terms of being able to talk about ideas. And I think we were quite compatible on our principles. And actually, she ended up running in another riding in Halifax in the election. So definitely, remain part of the same team.
Mhm.
So and then I was running against the finance minister. So that was pretty fun to get rid of. Sorry, this is terrible. That's a partisan politician now. I really wasn't before. I wasn't competitive. I was like my actual values are much more reflected in how the nomination race unfolded rather than the desire to move the finance minister out of his job. So
Well, I think that, no matter what political party or background you come from, I think that when you are able to run for the first time and defeat, not only an incumbent, but also one of, essentially the person in government with like the second most important job after the premier, that's, a pretty big thing. So I think anyone can understand that sentiment because it's not just politics, but also that's amazing as running for the first time that you were able to take that seat back.
yeah, I mean, I think in a sense, I didn't have any. I had an opinion about how the Liberal government had sort of governed for 8 years, but I didn't know my main opponent. I didn't know him personally, and I really, yeah, I just really kind of was like, we're going to win this, but like by focusing like on our team and what we had to say, and just kind of went for it. But yeah, and I had a great team, but I won the nomination in November, and COVID on, COVID off, but we were out canvassing as we could all the way through until the writ was dropped in July. So I think that was helpful. And then yeah, I mean, I've been I've been in the community for a long time, so I have lots of connections. But yeah, my son was with me on the campaign trail most of the time, which was really fun. So yeah, we tried to get to every door. We didn't quite make it, but we tried.
Well, I mean, it can be hard, especially if you live in a downtown area or center where you have a lot of apartment buildings. That's a
Yeah,
very
so
real challenge.
well, I don't know what it's like in other provinces. I don't know what the rules are, but in Nova Scotia, you legally aren't allowed to canvass in the apartment buildings until the writ is dropped. So the goal was, and I think this is the part of the goal we met, was to get to every door that we could, that wasn't behind an apartment building front door kind of thing before the RIT was dropped, but then we could not make all the apartment buildings. So I'm not quite sure what we're going to do this time, but yeah, it's a good challenge.
Well, you have some time to formulate a plan.
Yeah.
And then I was actually looking at your social media before chatting with you today, and I noticed that you had shared a TikTok video that either someone had made for about you, or I'm not sure if you had made it yourself, but it was about an independent commission that was brought forward, and you were responding to it, talking about it from the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can you tell me more about that, the commission, and what prompted your comments?
Yeah, sure. So, and you asked me about like why running at the particular time I ran, and I think the other thing I would just say is that it was also interesting for me to consider my privilege in being able to run. So until 2021, we didn't have set election dates in Nova Scotia, right? So the power remains in the hands of the government to call the election. And so you're sort of waiting for this election to be called. And I will say that, because I was working, like I had my own business, and there was an enormous amount of privilege in being able to be in that limbo space for a long time. I don't know, of any, like, it would be very hard to manage that situation in any other employment scenario where you're like, so maybe I'm going to need a couple months off soon, later, sometime. They're going to announce it, I'm going to be gone. So I think I was really conscious of my privilege in doing this role, and even just putting my name forward. So the commission is really interesting. So basically, the House of Assembly Legislative Management Act, that's probably not the right title, but you get the idea, calls for every general election, a commission is formed that reviews MLA salaries and other things, but MLA salaries. And, the Liberal government had always quashed that commission. So there hasn't actually been an MLA salary increase since 2013. Maybe earlier. Anyway, so not for a while, but, they formed the commission. We were asked to provide input. And one of the things that we really want to consider as our team is, what are all the questions around diversity, equity, access, inclusion? And I've also done I've led some work on the Nova Scotia NDP Constitution, looking at like, how do we live out our commitment to diversity? Like, we have this great commitment to diversity, and there was a gender parity policy on the books or in the Constitution, but there wasn't actually any other way to action our commitment or to measure it or to consider it. So definitely been thinking a lot about that. So we provide a lot of input in our report to the commission about, just considering all sorts of equity, like salary being one of them. So it's actually like, it's a salary or stipend that's more than the, average annual salary in Nova Scotia. But, if you had a large family, it's like, it's good, it's fine, but the salary could be a barrier. But then thinking about things like childcare, different types of access to different types of support. So, within the Nova Scotia NDP, we have an equity fund that provides $1,000 or aims to provide $1,000 to candidates, who are women or gender diverse. But, how do you think about that more broadly? So we really wanted to consider a lot of different issues. And the commission did some great work. It's a 360-page report. And so far, all the Conservatives have wanted to talk about has been the wage increase, the salary increase. And we had an amendment around a child care fund for MLA. So for folks who need childcare, whose children are still that young, for the sort of the extraordinary hours of being an MLA, so evenings and weekends and that sort of thing. And there was no appetite amongst the conservative MLAs who talked about us wanting, sort of special treatment, and how they, the people who were, in particular moms on the other side, talked about, they had done it and everyone could do it. You just need to dig in deep, which is, not actually how I view, thinking about accessibility and building structures that work for everyone. And when I worked at Dalhousie, in fact, if I traveled, I had access to childcare funding because it was recognized I had to travel for my work and I'd be away on the weekend. And, most, daycares and schools are not open. So that is an extra cost. And, anyway, so I think, we didn't get very far. We just had an emergency summer session in the legislature to block the MLA salary increases. But, I certainly kept inviting the government to consider the other 360 pages of the report and what other issues we should be looking at to diversify the people who sit in the people's house.
Yeah, I know firsthand that it can be really frustrating when the response you get back when you're challenging something that has been the status quo and is being, advocated to maintain that, when it's, I did it, so you should have to do it too. Well, why should it have to be hard? And why should it not be, if you recognize that maybe it was challenging for you, why wouldn't we do something to make it better for anyone else who's following in your footsteps?
Yeah.
It's a test that that just shouldn't even exist anymore. The idea that I struggled, therefore you must struggle too. Well, no, wouldn't it be better if we could address the struggle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also, I think unpack, I mean, we know this, we know that particularly in sort of cisgendered heterosexual couples, that women take on more of the housework and more of the childcare. But a good way to help shift that too is to have something that's for all parents, right? And so that you start thinking that, yeah, actually, if that if the parent who's male identified or whatever is spending Saturday at this event and that event and being a politician, that like those children don't just kind of disappear. Like, they actually, like, somebody needs to care for them, and assuming that your partner is available and able to do that, or that sort of thing is so I mean, it's that it's things like, we've never had a Mi'kmaq MLA in Nova Scotia, and so there is some provision that was established a while ago to have a Mi'kmaq designated seat, and it hasn't been actioned yet. So, like, government, why don't you talk to the Mi'kmaq organizations about that and sort of see, like, if this hasn't been filled, then why? And if this isn't the mechanism, then what is? Because it's pretty unacceptable for us to continue the way we are. So,
well, yeah, I think in 2022, if you're not addressing the barriers to whatever you're trying to accomplish, then you're not actually interested in fixing the issue.
Yeah.
And so that speaks volumes about what the priorities are. And especially coming out of COVID, we saw how quickly governments, provincial, federal, and municipal, were able to respond in a very tough situation. And it was because there was the will to act. So we have seen how, and by we, I mean both elected people and us, myself as a constituent, that when there is the will for government to act, that it does happen, and it can happen quickly, but there has to be that will. And without that will, then the cogs of government move slowly, if at all.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And, before this role, I did a lot of youth engagement and community engagement. And, really early on, young people were like, okay, so actually you could take action on climate change and you're not. So like, now I understand that this is a choice that you're making.
Yes.
So yeah, so I think it'll be interesting to see what the sort of lasting legacy is in terms of how we consider like the role of government and public administration in advancing priority issues and responding. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it speaks a lot about, but also not only how does government respond, but also that people have, the constituents of whatever level government it is, have the awareness and the understanding that that they can challenge politicians to demand answers around why their relative lack or direct lack of inaction, because they're very comfortable asking for votes without generally being specific and committing to policy ideas. But we have the ability to demand more, and we have to in order to challenge the status quo, and to see movement on issues that the government may not want to move on.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, yeah. All I can say is yes. Yes. Hooray. Yes.
Well, that's I really want to thank you for coming on today and for taking part in the podcast. And if I am ever, I have to say, I do love your legislature. I have been inside.
Okay, great.
It was a number of years ago. I loved it.
Yes.
I even got the chance. I'm not sure if I broke the rules or we were just allowed, but I even sat in the speaker's chair once.
Oh yeah.
And yes, and I pretended to like press the bell to call for,
Yeah.
and so it's a really beautiful space. And if anyone who is listening hasn't been to Halifax and you haven't been inside the legislature, I'm not sure, obviously now with COVID protocols, if that's still possible, but it's a really beautiful building.
Yeah, no, it is now back open for tours. And we were, like I said, we were open for an emergency summer session, so even in those few days we had lots of visitors in the gallery, and despite the heat, because it was a very hot day in that old building, or hot days. So yeah, so if anyone's interested, and always I'm always happy to hear from folks too who want to have a chat about social justice and politics and participation. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Well, if I'm ever in Halifax myself, I'll definitely take you up on that offer, and then we can take a picture beside the speaker's chair together this time.
Yes, that sounds great.
Well, thank you, Lisa. All the best, and I look forward to seeing all of the other issues that you take on in government when in the legislature.
Thank you so much. Keep doing your great work.
Thanks.